Is the Baja 5B really better than the new Funco Traxxas? Today, we're gonna find out. This brushless Rovan Baja 5B clone goes for about $950 on Fearless RC. It's the same place I got my 30 degrees north buggy from, and to go along with this, I also got some paddle tires and a brake kit to make this a fair comparison. As you can see, both the paddle tires and the brakes were fairly inexpensive. Putting these two cars together, you can see that they are essentially the same length and the same width, but that's where the similarities end. Unlike the Traxxas, the 5B has been around a long time, and it was originally designed as a gas vehicle. This brushless conversion came later, and there are some compromises made for that. And whereas this thing is an absolutely beautiful body, I think it's some of those compromises that are going to put the Traxxas ahead in a lot of categories, but we're going to find out. The first thing we need to do is remove this beautiful purple, silver, and black body. It's not really a body per se, it's just kind of a wrap around the outside, and it comes off with these 5 body clips. In order to easily remove it, we also are going to remove these light buckets. These just clip on, as do a lot of the accessories on this car. With those out of the way, you can see the body just sort of peels off the sides and then pulls out of the front. And this is a fairly flimsy piece of Lexan, but it's well protected by the rest of the car, so it doesn't usually get damaged too quickly, though some people do choose to run without it. One of the main reasons they might choose to run without it is this battery box. This thing's a little bit difficult to get to and nearly impossible with the body on. The original HPI Baja Flux has a little bit more user-friendly battery box lid, and it uses rotating clips instead of these body pins. We'll take a closer look at this in a minute. On top of that is this really nice looking nylon roll cage, which does have an aluminum skid plate on it. And this also has a roll cage style front shock tower as well as rear shock tower. To get a better look at everything, we need to remove these lower little body pods. These are held on with more body clips. And hiding behind that, you can see one of the main differences between this and the Traxxas. There's a lot of aluminum in this car. Another big difference is, at least on this Rovan RTR, we have a really nice Max 5 ESC and motor combo. This is a sweet system. To go along with that, we've got a 55 kg true 1/5 scale servo, as well as some seriously beefy arms in both the front and in the back. Next thing we need to do is take off this roll cage, but before we do, I want to talk about one of the big negatives on this car, and that is this battery tray. Again, the HPI version is a bit easier, but this thing requires 3 body pins to be removed, one of which is hidden down here and is very difficult to get to. And then once you remove those, you can take the lid off and sneak it out underneath the cage. Not super easy to do. And again, on this Rovan version, we've got a bunch of wires going through it, which makes it a little bit tricky. Plus the little pins holding the body clips in can just fall out once you take them out. So that's something you have to keep track of. In contrast, once you undo the 4 little hidden tabs on the Traxxas Funco body and remove it, underneath is a very simple latch style battery retainer. It's a bit limited in what you can fit in here because it has to be the right height, but it is very, very simple. And then of course there are options to upgrading that to battery retaining systems that use straps, so you do have a lot of upgrade choices here already. Though at least for now, those options pale in comparison to the ones you can get for the 5B, because this platform's been around a really, really long time. And this Rovan version's already got some pretty sweet upgrades, like these aluminum shock towers. Flipping this over, you can see we have a thick U-channel shaped aluminum chassis on the 5B, and it has skid plates in the front and rear. And this rear skid plate comes off with, you guessed it, a single body pin, and then it just slides right off, exposing the rest of that thick aluminum chassis plate. As you can see here, the chassis is in 2 sections. It's actually screwed together right here with 4 big bolts. We'll be taking that apart in just a minute. But now we need to remove this roll cage, which again comes off with just a body pin in the front here, and another one in the back here on both sides. There's a little latch here in the middle, though it is still retained here in the back, which required the removal of our first 4 screws which hold on this wing mount. Being a true 1/5 scale car, a lot of these screws are going to be M3 head and larger. And you only really need to take one side off, then you can just wiggle the cage out from underneath the shock tower. Because there are so many body clips on this thing and little washers that go with them, I recommend putting the body clips back in where you got them from. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up losing something, especially out in the field. At this point, I think it's important to point out that the Funco Traxxas uses exactly 0 body clips, so if you hate body clips, the choice might already be clear between these two. With that out of the way, we can get a closer look at the battery compartment. And this does have 2 decent sized trays in it, though there really is no positive retention with this lid, so your batteries might be kind of bouncing around in there depending on what size they are. Sharing some space under the lid, but in its own little compartment, is the receiver. And to go along with that receiver, you get this absolute unit of a Flysky GT3B. This transmitter is pretty cool, though. It's been around a long time, as you can tell by the fact that it takes 8 AA batteries. Overall, these transmitters are very reliable, though I don't think it's going to be able to do the mixing we're going to need for these front brakes that I got from Fearless RC, which is why later we're going to be switching over to and checking out this absolute beauty beauty of a Flysky G11P. Banggood sent me this, and I think it's going to be the perfect application for it. And if it's any good, I might be switching this over to my daily driver. I'll tell you more about that later. But this is the transmitter it comes with, and this is the transmitter we're going to be comparing it to the Funco Traxxas with. Before we can take a look at any of that, of course, we need to take a look at this powertrain, and I think this thing will split apart in modules just like the Funco does. By the way, I'm not super familiar with this platform, so if any of you 5B experts out there see me doing something wrong, let me know down in the comments. And now with that split apart, we can get a closer look at what seems like a beast of a power system. Removing this cover, we can see we have a Mod 1.5 pinion gear, but surprisingly a plastic Mod 1.5 spur gear. Now, being Mod 1.5, this gear should be pretty tough, though for something this large and heavy, I'm kind of surprised to see plastic on here. And this is actually going to be a bit of a downgrade from what Traxxas gives you. Even though the Traxxas gears are sintered, they are steel. We do have a little bit of a steel insert in here, but overall, yeah, that's just a plastic gear. As you can see on top of that, we have a WP5 BL200. This is a Max 5 G1, which should have plenty of power. Now, underneath that is the rear differential, and that looks like it's going to be kind of hard to get to. All right, with those screws out, we can take this rear brace off, which I think is going to give us access to take this rear differential out of here with just a few more screws here on the bottom. So it turns out this differential housing is tied in a lot further up, so we're going to have to go a bit deeper to get it out of here. Okay guys, as you can see, things got out of hand here pretty quickly, and it takes a ton of screws to get to this rear differential, but we finally got it out of here. At least as far as I can tell, getting to this thing requires near complete disassembly of the rear end, and it's not going to be for the faint of heart. The Traxxas absolutely has this beaten in ease of access to this differential. Let's see just how often it's going to be necessary to get to this thing. Got a bit of a blast from the past here with some self-tappers. And now we can finally pull this apart and take a look at our prize inside. And our prize looks pretty good. We've got some nice grease in here. These gears do look all sintered. And this aluminum housing rear differential looks like an absolute unit. Pulling these screws out, we get a hallmark of an old design. We've got some split type lock washers here. Interestingly enough, these split type lock washers don't actually do anything. The reason that screws come undone is due to vibration. They can't actually loosen on their own because this helix is not steep enough. So it's almost entirely down to vibration if a screw comes loose. And NASA actually did a bunch of testing and found that these spring type lock washers don't really make any difference for vibration loosening, which is why you almost never see them in automotive or industrial applications anymore. Taking a closer look at this gear, I can't tell if it is machined or sintered. The finish on it looks sintered, but it might have been machined and then stonewashed or something like that, which is giving it that look. And now pulling this aluminum housing apart, we can see some RTV sealant, which is something you don't see very often in the RC industry. And inside here, we have some really stout looking sintered steel gears. These things are absolute monsters and are far larger than you would see on a Traxxas. And it almost looks like there might be some sort of limited slip situation going on in here, though I can't really tell how it's supposed to work. Let me know down in the comments if you know more about that. Overall though, especially for 8S power on two-wheel drive, unless this thing's made out of crappy materials, I expect we won't have to go in here very often. This does have an O-ring on it, so I think the RTV was redundant. I'm not going to put any more back on. If this thing ends up leaking, I guess I'll regret that decision. Overall though, I'm very impressed with how stout this is, and I suspect and hope we won't have to dig into it too often because again, getting to it's a lot of work. Speaking of which, let me get all this put back together and we've got a few more things we need to look at before we take this thing out and bash it. After putting all of that back together at once, I can definitely tell you, at least so far, the Funco Traxxas has the Baja beat in ease of maintenance. This thing's a lot easier to work on. One thing we're going to need to change before we go bash are these ESC connectors. These are actually XT150s and they're pretty cool. Since they're individual connectors, you can actually choose to just use one connector by sliding these together, or you can use this adapter and make it into two connectors so you can use two batteries. Unfortunately, not very many people use XT150s, myself included, so we're going to be switching this over to QS8s. In order to solder to these big 8 AWG wires, you're going to need a pretty good soldering iron. Unfortunately, weaker soldering irons tend to not be able to actually penetrate this thick of a wire, and even though you'll see solder on the outside, you might not have a good solder joint. I bought this Ixon T320 a little while back. This thing does 200 watts, and it works really, really well for these big connectors and big wires. It actually uses a clone JBC T245 handle, and that means you can use real JBC tips on it, and especially these high thermal capacity cartridges cartridge tips are really, really good. As you can see here, even with that 200-watt soldering iron and holding on there for a while, we still didn't get full penetration. It's really difficult with this very thick wire. And in my experience, I found it's nearly impossible with lower power irons. The front end of this car looks pretty neat. It's got a nice thick aluminum shock tower, some big aluminum threaded body shocks, as well as some pretty beefy looking arms and some interesting steering geometry. Just like in the rear, we do have a sway bar in the front. And then even though the Traxxas does finally come with a Metal Gear servo, I get the feeling this thing's gonna absolutely crush it. To take a closer look at that, we need to remove this entire tray, and to do that, I think it's just a few more body clips. And with that, this whole thing should just lift right on out of here. Unlike the Traxxas, this does use a true 1/5 scale size servo. That means there are going to be a lot more options available for upgrade servos, though these aren't cheap servos. As you can see, we do have O-rings on these screws. Under this cover, we can see we do have a brushed servo. This is a big brushed motor in it, as well as a nice, neat looking circuit board. There is an O-ring on this bottom lid, and then with 2 more screws. I'm always playing with fire leaving these servo horns on. Leaving them on means I don't have to realign the servo horn, but it sometimes means that I can't get the servo back together again. We'll see how it goes this time. But pulling this off, doesn't look like this is going to come apart without taking that servo horn off. This is a nice aluminum servo horn, and it does have arms on both sides, which makes its connection to the steering pretty strong. And then removing that, we can get a look at these gears, and yeah, we've got an all steel gear train in here, and being a big servo, these are big gears. I expect this to be pretty strong. It's rated at 55 kilogram centimeters, which of course I don't expect to be true, but there's only one way to find out. By the way, guys, if you enjoy serious technical videos, including ones with crazy modifications, make sure you get subscribed, because I've got one more video planned for that Funco Traxxas, and I don't think you're going to want to miss it. Now, the last big difference between these two cars are the included tires. The Funco Traxxas comes with paddles and slick front tires for a 2-wheel drive vehicle out of the factory, while at least this Rovan Baja 5B comes with these general purpose off-road tires. These are on real beadlock wheels. These are just the standard style wheels that most 1/5 scales come with. The fronts are a bit more narrow, and as you can see, these tires are a lot smaller than what come on the Funco Traxxas, though of course there are a lot of 1/5 scale options you can choose from. And we do have some paddles we're going to be trying in just a few minutes, but for now, let me get this car put together and I'll see you outside. All right, let's start off with a baseline on the Traxxas. We're not going to do a real speed test with this because we've already done some modifications to it, such as putting a Hobbywing ESC in it, but we can get a feel for how it drives on various surfaces. With these paddle tires out of the box, it handles grass really, really well. It's a little bit wider in the back right now, but even without the extra M2C widening kit, it is definitely very stable, and those disc brakes in the front really help it stop well, even though 2-wheel drive vehicles don't usually stop very well. Obviously, in dirt, this thing's gonna be amazing. That's what these tires are made for, and that's what this dirt buggy is made for. As you saw there, if you get a little over enthusiastic, you can still flip this thing over, but overall, it's pretty stable, and it definitely handles off-road very well, handles the rough stuff well, and is an absolute missile in dirt. And again, not too bad in grass either. Of course, rooster tails are no problem. And while this has more power, the stock system has quite a bit of power as well, and it handles really, really decently. Overall, this is a very fun car that you can get a lot of joy from out of the box, and for a large 2-wheel drive vehicle, I think it's really, really good. All right, now for the Baja. We're gonna start with a speed test. I have not driven this at all yet, and I can tell you already, especially without a gyro, this thing is much harder to control. See if we can get the full throttle. Full throttle. Okay, so yeah, she does full throttle. Not too bad. It's actually not as fast as I thought it was going to be, though. See if we can get another pass. Full throttle. That's actually reasonably stable. Let's see if we can get her a little bit closer. I do miss those disc brakes, though. All right, full throttle. There we go. All right, let's see what we got. It's actually not too bad without the disc brakes, though. It does like to spin around when you slam them on. Let me show you. Full brakes. That's actually not that bad. Let's see how fast we went. All right, guys, she did 45 miles an hour, which is pretty close to what the Traxxas did. I think this thing has more in it with a little bit more gearing, maybe some better tires. These tires definitely like to slide around, which makes this fun, and it has more of that classic 2-wheel drive feel to it. Obviously, if we put a receiver with a gyro in it, it would be a lot easier to handle. As it is right now, with the stock tires on grass, it's really not too terrible. It does take more skill than the Traxxas does though, as it does like to swap ends, especially at low speed. Once you get going, it's a lot easier to control though, and it's not too bad. And overall, this is also a fun experience on grass. Now, given that these are more all-terrain tires, they don't really kick up the roost quite as much in the dirt as the Traxxas does, but it still goes through the dirt, and it's still fun, and it still feels pretty good. These shocks feel like they're tuned fairly decently. Let's see how it handles a little bit of a jump. Yeah, not too bad, and it does go over the rough stuff pretty well. Being a 1/5 scale vehicle, this thing's gonna be reasonably stable, and it definitely doesn't seem like it wants to flop over on its side or flip over on its lid. Though from a standstill, if you really get on it, it can be pretty hard to control. In deeper sand, it also seems to do reasonably well. I'm actually kind of impressed with these tires. Given their tread, I kind of expected them to not be very versatile, but overall, they feel pretty good. Again, I don't think they feel quite as good as the Traxxas tires do out of the box, but they definitely aren't bad. And again, while you're gonna have to have more skill to drive this, especially without a gyro, and especially without those front brakes, I think you'll have some fun with it. Now, I do want to see how this thing jumps, because out of the box, the Traxxas did not land jumps very well. All right, just like with the Traxxas, we're gonna start small and easy. Let's see how she does. Oh. Okay, so air control, not great. Let me get a little bit more throttle next time. Well, it survived that horrible nose landing. Let's go a little bit more on the throttle. Yeah, it still wants to nose land, even with full throttle. Let's try that one more time. Yeah, she really does not like to handle in the air very well. I'm definitely gonna have to give the point to Traxxas on that, because it has a lot more air control and it jumps a lot flatter. Let's try one more time. Okay, there we go. We got one out of it. If we got one, we can get two. I'm gonna jump this famous last words just one more time. Okay, so yes, it can be jumped. It's just more challenging than the Traxxas. Well, so far this thing is pretty fun, though I do miss those front brakes. Let's see if we can fix that. But before we attempt that install, we actually need to switch transmitters, because this transmitter isn't gonna do what we need it to. The problem with having an electric vehicle with mechanical brakes is when you hit the brakes, you're also hitting reverse. So when you accelerate and you hit the brakes, that's fine. But when you try to go into reverse, that's also going to hit the brakes. And since we'll need a separate servo for the brakes, we're gonna have to set up a mix that this thing just can't do. So enter the Flysky G11P. This thing is absolutely beautiful. It's got a glass screen on it, buttons and dials and switches and knobs everywhere, an adjustable trigger, different back straps, and all kinds of other fun stuff. To power it, you can use two 18650s, although I don't have any 18650s, so we're gonna pull this tray out of here, and we're gonna pull the LiPo out of my daily driver G7P. I've been using this thing for a while, and to be honest with you, I don't recommend it. The controller itself is fine, but the interface on this thing is absolutely maddening. It is the worst interface I've ever used, and I only use this thing for one reason, which I'll show you in a minute. I will just plug this into the balance port, and it should fit in here no problem. Yeah, you can fit a much bigger LiPo in here than this. Now, powering this beast up, we don't need to set a failsafe right now. You can see we've got a really beautiful color screen on here, and I'm hoping that this menu system is a lot better. As you can see, there are some pre-made mixes in here. I don't think any of these are gonna work for us. So what we'll end up doing is setting our own custom mix. And basically what I'll need to be able to do is have the normal throttle channel, and then set up one mix that gives us just brake on an auxiliary channel for the servo. But then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up another mix to where when I push either this button or maybe this button, it disables that brake servo. So what we'll be able to do is have our normal throttle and brake, but then if we want to go in reverse, we just hold down that button and hit reverse, and it'll give us reverse without dragging those brakes. And I fully expect this really awesome transmitter to be able to do that. But again, that's not why I'm probably going to make this thing my daily driver. I'll show you that in just a few minutes, but for now, let's see if we can get those brakes to work. The wheel side of these brakes is going to be pretty straightforward. Basically, all you do is take one of these carbon fiber brake rotors, put it over the actual hex itself, grab the appropriate brake caliper, and then install it with 2 screws. After that, it's just a matter of threading in the brake cable and then routing that through here. Then we just need to install our mounting bracket, our mount for the other end of the Bowden cable, and then we would just need to figure out where to put our servo so we could pull on these cables. Unfortunately, I think that's where this is going to be a showstopper for this particular setup. I was going to put the servo on this battery cover, but we've got a little bit of a problem with this battery cover. This battery cover is about the most maddening thing I've ever used on an RC car. There's a very small hole in the back of this cover that all your wires, including the ones from the receiver, have to go through. And getting my battery connectors, especially these QS8s, through this little hole literally took me 30 minutes. But I think there's a very simple solution to this. Take that tab out of there and problem solved. Now you can just put the lid on over the wires. Why it's not like that from the factory, I have no idea, but if you get one of these, that's the first thing I would do. And that is so much easier, but even with that mod, figuring out how to get this servo mounted on top this box and still be able to take it off is gonna be beyond the scope of this video, so let's not do that right now. However, we still are gonna switch over to the G11P, and here's why. The main reason I've been using this G7P as my daily driver isn't because it's a great transmitter, because again, the interface is horrible. It's because of this really nice first-party phone mount. And guess what? The G11P has the exact same mount. You'd be surprised at how rare not only first-party phone mounts are for controllers, but the ability to mount a phone at all. Obviously, you can do something like double-side tape it, but with as much recording as I do, and as much recording as some people do, this is a really, really nice thing to have. And I'm very excited to get it off this G7P and get it on this much, much nicer G11P with all the neat features, buttons, dials, switches, and very cool customization ability. Now, I've got 2 more things we need to do before I give you my final thoughts on the 5B versus Funco, and that's try out these paddle tires and give it a durability test. Now, obviously, without the front brakes, this is not going to be an apples to apples comparison, but it was never going to be an apples to apples comparison anyway, as these 2 cars, while similar in size and specifications, are very, very different. Now, these paddle tires definitely give this thing quite a bit more pep than it had before. And oh yeah, she definitely scoots now. This is a completely different animal with these paddle tires on here. And it actually does feel more similar to the Traxxas than I expected it to. Obviously, again, without those front brakes, you're not gonna have quite as good a handling when you're trying to stop. But to be honest with you, it's not that bad. And yeah, these paddle tires are the right choice for this car, just like they are on the Traxxas. It really is awake now. Let's see how durable it is. We're gonna start with a bit of a big jump here. Hopefully we can keep that nose up, whoops. And by a big jump, I meant a triple corkscrew. Now let's try for a big jump. Yeah, that's a pretty good sized jump. Air control isn't very good, as you would expect. Try for another one. Not bad. This thing is quite a bit heavier than the Traxxas is. I mean, it's not quite twice as heavy, but it's probably getting pretty close. And it flies through the air and lands very similarly to the Traxxas. Although I would say this thing probably lands a little bit softer, as it seems like the shocks are tuned better. Let's see how it handles some bad landings though. This is gonna hurt. Oh, well, survived that. Let's try something a little bit worse. Oh. Yeah, soaked that up. Now obviously we're landing in dirt here, so this isn't like landing in concrete on a skate park, but still not great for it. Oh, I think we broke something. Now, before I give you my final thoughts, let's see what we broke. It's definitely in this wheel. And taking a closer look, it seems like we might have sheared this drive pin. Yep, cut her right in half. Now, obviously, there are going to be cheap and easy upgrades to these drive pins, but it did break. With that being said, which one of these cars do I think is better? Well, I think the very first thing we need to talk about is price. Obviously, this Baja, no matter how you do it, is probably going to end up being cheaper than the Traxxas Funco. The Funco's $1,300, and as you can see here, especially after using the coupon that's down in the description, you can get this thing for $950. That's $350 cheaper, and if you don't care about having the paddle tires, which again really aren't that expensive, or things like the front brakes, which you're gonna have to do some custom work for anyway, that's all you're gonna spend. Do you get a better car for that less money? Well, it really depends on what you're looking for. Obviously, the power system's gonna be a little bit more appealing to most people. This servo is probably gonna be very tough and is fairly easy to replace and upgrade. And overall, this is a pretty beastly vehicle, but there is a problem with it. It's based on a 20-year-old design, and it feels like it's based on a 20-year-old design. Working on it is significantly more complicated than working on the Funco Traxxas. Things don't really fit together the way you might expect them to from a modern basher perspective. And overall, especially given that this thing was originally designed to run on gas, it's a bit more challenging in a lot of different respects. The Traxxas is going to be lighter, easier to drive out of the box, easier to work on, probably easier to get parts for in the long run. And in my opinion, out of the box, for most people, will probably be more fun. Now that being said, this is a lot cheaper and it's a lot of fun too. There are obviously a ton of upgrades available for it because it's been out a long time, and which one you decide to get if you're looking at one or the other is really up to you. You've got this Rovan from Fearless RC that is a great choice. They've got other options as well that are a little bit more expensive but come with a lot more upgrades. But if you want super simple and don't mind paying the extra money, I think the Funco Traxxas might be the car for you. And if you want to see some awesome content, I think one of these videos might be for you.